Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming again to another screening series Q&A. My name is Camelia Shofani, and I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs and Events here at the IDA. I want to thank our sponsors, KCRW and Variety. For more information on our screening series lineup and Q&As, please visit documentary.org/screening-series. This evening, we'll be having a conversation between film critic and journalist Robert Abele and filmmaker Lizzie Gottlieb, whose film Turn Every Page premiered at Tribeca Film Festival earlier this year. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva as the past, present, and future caretakers of land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. And so without further ado, give it over to Robert. Thank you so much.
Hi, yes, I'm Robert Abele. I'm the one with has well, we both have bookcases behind us, but I have a beard and fairly light skinned, and I'm here with Lizzie Gottlieb, the director of Turn Every Page.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Gottlieb. I have there are a lot of books between our two screens. I feel like we have a lot of books behind us. I have no beard. I'm sort of, I don't know what, brownish, blondish hair.
Yes, and I have behind me actually, because I'm a huge fan of the Robert Caro books, The Power Broker. So this is a movie that certainly was near and dear to my heart as I was watching it. And Lizzie, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to make this. And I guess I'll just start off by asking, when did you know you wanted to make this movie about your dad and his work with Robert Caro?
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but it has been 7 years that I've been working on this film.
Okay.
It's
like working on a Caro book.
Well, exactly. I heard, so my father is an editor and a publisher, and I grew up in this house kind of surrounded by his writers, and, you know, everybody he was connected to was like part of our family. But for some reason, I had never met Robert Caro. There was something different about that relationship, that dynamic. And I heard Bob Caro give a speech about 7 or 8 years ago, about his working relationship with my father, that editorial process. And he talked about how essential he felt my father was to his process, but also how enormous their fights were. And somebody in the audience said, "What do you fight about?" And he said, "We have very different feelings about the semicolon." And that they have been fighting over semicolons for 50 years. So, and that, you know, as we know, everybody is waiting for Bob Caro's final volume on Lyndon Johnson, and they're not going to not fight about a semicolon in the interest of speeding up this process. And the next day I went on a walk, and it suddenly just struck me like a lightning bolt that I had to make this film. And of course, they both said no. I asked my father, he said, absolutely not. No, it's too private. This is not something you should be filming. I kept asking and asking and asking. He finally said, okay, you can ask Bob Caro, but Bob Caro will say no. And I called Bob Caro because, of course, he doesn't email because he's old school.
Well, I'm not surprised about that.
Bob Caro said, no, I don't speak about my writing process. It's too private. And I said, of course, I understand. And he said, but he had actually seen a film I had made that he respected. And he said, come and talk to me. And over the course of that conversation, he changed his mind. And he said, I've never seen a film about a writer and an editor. And it's a kind of mysterious, dynamic relationship process. And I think he said it out of a sort of gracious respect for my father in a way. He said, all right, he would let me start making this film. And I think if I can just keep talking, or if you have other questions, but I think I felt, you know, that it was worth spending these 7 years on, because it was an opportunity to show myself and the world, perhaps, you know, something that we don't often get to see, which is the inside of a 50-year-long creative partnership that's contentious and fiery and fierce and wildly productive. And to see what the editing process is in a sort of vanishing world of book publishing. And also to try to understand something about what it takes to reveal the kind of truths about power in America that Bob Caro has been able to reveal. So I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And here we are.
I mean, the movie covers a lot. It's not just the relationship. You're getting in small biographies of Robert Moses and Lyndon Johnson, the subjects of Caro's books. And it's about you and your father. And also to my mind, one of the things I love about it is that it seems like you made a great movie about the beauty of professionalism. Is that something that you kind of thought about as you were making it?
Yes, absolutely. I think the way I put it to myself was that it's really about the joy of work, the profound joy of work and of collaboration, of creative collaboration, which was incredibly inspiring to me, and I hope will be to others. They love their work so intensely. They're so devoted to it. And I think they have so much fun, even if they're angry and upset. One of the things that surprised me as I made the film was how much fun it was to make the film. And I hope how much fun it is to be with them. They're pretty hilarious and charming.
No, the thing about the fights is that you get the sense at a certain point that they need those fights. I mean, to kind of keep them spurred on, almost to keep their energy level up. And I believe your dad talks about, or no, maybe it's Caro who talks about, you just can't get to the point where you say like, oh, that'll write itself, or that's just not the way to approach these kinds of projects.
It's true. It's true. They say everything is as important as everything else.
So if words mattered to both of these men, what mattered to you when it came to making this movie?
Well, it's a little intimidating to have these two guys as models as you're starting to make a film. We would turn at every juncture, we would sort of turn to each other, my producers and I, and my editors and I, and say, what would Robert Caro do? Which can be quite intimidating. But I think what was important to me was, I think, trying to capture some of the extraordinary nature of who they are as humans, not just the impressive things that they've done, but who they are and why this matters. I think they're both, my dad is 91 and Bob Caro is 86.
Mm-hmm.
And the clock is ticking for them to finish their work. And I think it was a particular moment to make this film as they are facing issues of mortality and legacy. So I wanted to be able to honor that without it being a sort of homage to them. I really wanted it to be an active, dynamic film where something is at stake and that there's something kind of vibrant and alive on screen, not that we're just like telling a story of two successful people.
No, it's interesting because it's a movie that is about a 50-year collaboration, but it never feels like a movie that's just looking back. It is a movie about what's going on like right now. It has that feeling to it too. Did you, when you're spending 7 years making a movie, was there a point early on when there was an aha moment, like, okay, I know what this film is, like maybe a moment you captured, something that you got on film that you said like, okay, this is going to be definitely a movie?
There were a lot of those moments and a lot of also the other kind of moment of thinking, how is this going to work? It's a complicated film. So there are a lot of moments of thinking, oh, I'm making a movie about two old Jews sitting in chairs talking about words. Maybe it's not going to be a blockbuster. But then there were other moments, I think when Bob Caro let us follow him to Texas and brought us to the Johnson Library, and we can see the enormity of what he has faced and what he has sifted through. Mm-hmm. That was a really extraordinary moment when he took us to the boyhood home and talked about how he coaxed Sam Houston Johnson to telling him the story of Lyndon Johnson's childhood. It was a magical moment where we sat there in this historic house where Lyndon Johnson grew up And Bob Caro talks about the shadows in the room being the same as the shadows when Johnson was a child. And we were sitting there looking at those shadows, watching Bob Caro talk about what he had done. It was pretty magical. And I think I knew then that we had something kind of, wonderful and emotional, which
Right. That
mattered to me.
That thing where you're connecting to your subject at the moment that he's telling you about, he connected to his subject. I mean, that's like just fantastic filmmaking. Yeah, that must have been really. I mean, he's so boyish in Austin. I mean, the fact that he's in his mid-80s just completely goes away. It feels like.
It was incredible to see that his passion for research and his, I keep using the word joy, but joy in what he was able to do. And that being very different from the writing process, which for him is a little bit, as he says, a little painful, a little excruciating and hard, was great to see.
Yeah, the private aspect of him really, I mean, it's something that comes over his face like instantly when he realizes he's getting to a private moment that he maybe doesn't want to talk about or show you. Was that what was that like to experience?
Well, as I said, I didn't really know Bob Caro when we started this project. And in retrospect, I think what a huge leap of faith it was on his part to trust me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think he might have thought I was going to spend 6 weeks making a little film and then it would be done. I don't think he knew it was a 7-year project, neither did I, frankly. But I think that something happened over those years. I think he started to trust me and he felt that maybe I have a perseverance that meant that I cared enough about what I was doing.
Oh, wow.
And it was very, very moving and gratifying to feel that by the end of this, I think we have developed a friendship, which I value enormously.
That sounds great. So tell me about, in what ways is being the daughter of one of your subjects more difficult than you might have imagined?
My dad and I are very close. And we have a really good time together. So in that sense, I guess the most difficult part was convincing him to let me do this because he thought it was a terrible idea. And he can be quite fierce when he's against something. But once he signed on, it really felt like just a delightful thing for the most part to do this. He was pretty cooperative. He talked to me when I needed him to talk to me. So that part was pretty great. And I got to spend a lot of time with my father and learning about an aspect of his life that I really didn't know that much about.
Yeah, tell me about what you learned about your dad that you didn't know before you made this movie.
Again, it's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer for it, but it was really, this was not, one of the reasons I didn't want to make a film that was just about my father and his career is I didn't really feel that there were mysteries for me to uncover. And I sort of feel that to make a film for me, there needs to be something you're trying to find out that you don't actually know that much about. And in terms of my dad, I didn't know that much about his working relationship with Caro, but I know him very well. And so I guess it was this relationship that I learned about and a little bit more about what he does. But it was really just kind of trying to capture his humor and insight and adorableness, if I can say that. That's not, my father says women should not use the word cute. So I try not to use that word. He thinks it's demeaning to women. But my father says in the movie that what he admires most in Caro is his industriousness. And he has this funny line where he says, anyone can be adorable, but not everyone can be industrious with results. And I feel these two guys are both industrious and adorable. So to be able to capture that was pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that's so true. The way you mentioned that Caro maybe kind of came around to, I mean, the friendship was built out of this idea that he admired your perseverance. Was there a newfound way that your relationship with your dad has, you see him trying to edit you at one point. You show that, which is kind of great, which shows that he's actually involved, really truly involved in the movie at that point. You talk about, did anything happen like that?
Well, my father is always trying to edit me in a supportive way. He has my best interest at heart. So sometimes he'll say, the color of that shirt is really not flattering. You shouldn't be wearing green, for example. So in that way, but in terms of the filmmaking, he was mostly just very constructive and supportive.
Well, he does clarify, which I think is probably good for a lot of people who don't know what editors do, is that you have to love what you're doing to edit it properly, that you shouldn't, you're not supposed to edit something you don't like, right?
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's a really great lesson. He says a few things about that. I love when he says editing is a service job. It's not your book. It's about making somebody else's work better. And as he finds it important to say, better of what it is, not to try to turn it into something else, but try to take what it is and improve it in what it's aiming to do. And I think that's very, very useful in all sorts of endeavors.
Yeah.
Advice. And he also has that moment I love from that interview from the 70s where he talks about how if something is successful that you turned down, you need to remind yourself that it would not have been successful if you had done it because you turned it down because you didn't like it or believe in it. So that sort of feeling of having peace with your own decisions and the path you've chosen to take.
Yeah, there's a thing when you're reviewing a movie that you're not supposed to review the movie that isn't there. The one that you think you want, because that would be a totally different movie. It's like you have to look at what's there. So that was great to hear him say that. So what did they think of the movie? I assume they've seen it by now.
They have seen it. I showed it to them before we were totally locked. I wanted to know if they were going, it's a tricky thing, right?
Yeah.
What would I do if they hated it? I don't know, but I wanted to know if that was going to be an issue. I showed it to Bob Caro, and I think the first thing he said was, "I love the word looms," which my father's, so that was funny. And Caro really is very, very supportive of the film. There was one moment before I showed it to him where I said, "I'm so sorry, Bob, that this is taking me so long to finish the film."
Oh,
and
nice.
He did one of those moments that you mentioned in the film where he closed his eyes and got very, very internal. And then he looked up at me and he said, "Lizzie, it's not about how long it takes to make. It's about whether it will endure."
Mm-hmm.
And that felt like, the voice of Zeus coming down and saying something very incredible to me, sort of giving me license to keep going and to make the film I wanted to make. And I think he really believes in it now, which is very wonderful.
That's great. And then did you mention what your dad thought?
Oh, my dad watched it. He had two tiny comments of things that I can't remember now what they were, that he felt were not quite good enough.
Okay.
And that was what he said immediately. And I said, "But did you like anything about it?" He says, "Of course, I like the whole thing. It's terrific." That was it.
Spoken as somebody who doesn't work for 7 years on something.
Exactly. No, but he, I think he keeps saying he's very happy for me more than for himself.
Okay.
They're two men who really they're not interested in self-promotion, and they're wary of anything that seems, this is the opposite of the Instagram age. Like they don't want to seem self-promotional or pretentious. And so, yeah, I don't know. So they're pleased, but not perhaps for themselves.
And as a fan who was amazed that he got to see them actually working together, the sound was off. Can you offer up a tidbit of anything you heard in that meeting, just filming it, that you thought was particularly interesting? A little something somebody said? Are you allowed to do that?
I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that. I think maybe part of the deal was that those are the secrets of the tomb. Is that the expression?
I totally get it. Well, I mean, like for anybody who's making a biographical doc, what's your piece of advice to somebody who's, making a movie about another person, even if it's somebody they know or somebody they don't know?
Well, That's a very good question. It's hard to boil it down to one. My producers, Jen and Joanne, and I are always saying, like, make a list, put that on the list of things to remember for next time. That list is very, very long. I think I teach a documentary directing class.
Okay.
And I think one thing, okay, I have two things.
All right.
I always tell my students to ask specific questions about moments of heightened emotion. What was the most terrifying moment of this process, rather than asking a more general question. And I was interviewing Bob Caro, and there came a moment where I realized that I hadn't taken my own advice. I hadn't done that. And I asked him that question that's in the film, where I said, in this, what was the most daunting moment of research for you? And I thought he was going to tell a story of going to the Johnson Library and seeing the 45 million documents he had to go through. And instead, he tells the story of how he uncovered the fact that Lyndon Johnson stole his election of 1948 for the Senate. And it was so chilling and striking to have him open up with that story that is so relevant and so important about how elections have been stolen in this country, and what it actually looks like and what it doesn't look like, and what it takes for him to get to the truth of that, of that stolen election, was so remarkable. So having, I guess, taking my own advice and asking those moments of small triumphs or hardships or small emotional moments within a big story, I think is very useful.
No, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, especially because as Kara says, we're at a moment where democracy is something that we need to protect, and his books are very much historically relevant all over again. I feel like about what power means and what it takes to get there, and what people do sometimes when they have it. Thank you, Lizzie, for giving us this warm and insightful and kind of loving portrait of these literary titans, and your wonderful father. And I'd like to speak for all Caro fans, I believe, by saying I look even more forward to the fruits of their collaboration after seeing this movie. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just that the movie is going to be released in theaters at the end of the year, and I hope people will send people to go see it.
Yes, I hope people go see this movie too, and rush out and get this book and all the others. So thank you, Lizzie, and thank you for joining us, and thanks IDA, and we'll see you all later.